Okay, so last week what we talked about is Jesus, and we're going to read all. If you have a Bible that has the words of Jesus in red, tonight these are going to be all red letters, and all that means is that this is Jesus talking. And what he did was he called his disciples to him, the ones that were following him, because there's a difference between people that are just hanging around to get some food or see miracles, and people that actually wanted to follow him. And so these addresses, these teachings that he's teaching, these are to the people that really want to follow him. They're called disciples. That's what it means to be a disciple. The word disciple even has the word discipline in it. So to be a disciple means to be a follower or a student of the person that you're following. And he was the master, and that's what they were doing. They were following him. And so Jesus had some words he was teaching them how to live. Now, what we're going to read tonight is absolutely nothing like what the world tells you the way you're supposed to live. And you're going to see that, okay? Because that's the thing about the Lord Jesus, is that he doesn't teach us to follow the ways that everybody else follows. The world has a certain way that they deal with things, and that's what the world tells you. This is how you need to live. This is how you need to treat people. If people do this to you, this is what you need to do. Jesus has some things that he wants to say to his followers. And might I add, these are the kinds of things that are going to show who is a real follower and who is not. Because just because somebody tells you they're a Christian does not mean that they are a Christian. There are many, many people. I think years ago I read a survey that like 80% of our country claims to be Christian. Now, if that was really true, because the word Christian means follower of Christ. Now, if that was really true, our country would not be what it is right now. We all know that our country is not following Christ as a whole. We know that. We can see it. They're doing everything but following Christ, right? So let's get into what Jesus has to say about different things. Verse 27, we'll start right there. Jesus says this, "But I say unto you, which hear, love your enemies, do good to them which hate you." Okay? First of all, he says to love your enemies, okay? That's not what the world teaches us to do. The world teaches us to destroy your enemies. If somebody comes against you, you come against them. If somebody does something to you, you do it back, right? That's what the world says. Jesus says, love your enemies, do good. He says, do good to those that hate you. Now, a couple things here. First of all, if you're going to follow Jesus, you're going to have enemies. Just to let you know, that's something that every follower of Jesus is going to have enemies. And if you follow Jesus, you're going to be hated. Okay? You might as well get used to it. Jesus was hated too. Why do you think he got crucified? He got crucified because the religious people of his day, they did not like who he was and what he stood for, and they killed him. They killed him to get rid of him, but he resurrected. And anyway, that's a whole different matter. But anyways, he says, do good to them which hate you. Look at verse 28. Bless those that curse you, and pray for them which despitefully use you. Okay? So, bless those that curse you. Have you ever been cursed by somebody?
Oh, yeah.
Now, it can go both ways, not just cursing, but just like somebody can speak a curse over you. We got a lot of that nowadays, especially people that are into witchcraft and things like that. If they don't like somebody, they'll do a curse on them. They'll curse them. Now, Jesus says to do what? People trying to curse you, bless them. Okay? Then he says, pray for those which despitefully use you. What does it mean to be despitefully used? Can anybody tell me?
Mistreated.
Mistreated for sure. And it's even more than that. It has the word spite in it. It means somebody is really being spiteful and nasty.
Abused.
Yes, and they're despitefully using you. In other words, they're using you for their own ends, and they're using you in a malicious, manipulative way, right? So what does Jesus say? He says, does he say, get rid of that person, don't have anything to do with them, just treat them like dirt? No, he says, pray for them. Okay? Do you see the difference between what Jesus teaches and what the world teaches, none of these things, the world teaches none of these things. It teaches exactly the opposite. Okay?
Take a number one only.
Yeah. And then look at verse 29. And to him that smiteth thee or hitteth thee on one cheek, offer also the other. And to him that taketh away thy cloak, forbid not him to take thy coat also. So Jesus says, if somebody hits you, turn the other cheek. Now that is not what our world tells you to do nowadays. Not at all. Somebody smacks you, you sock them right back, right? That's what the world says. Jesus says, no, don't do that. Turn the other cheek. Okay? Now, you have to understand, I want to explain something really quickly here. Without the Lord inside of you, without really having him in your heart, you can't do any of these things that we just talked about. You won't be able to do it. You, in and of yourself, I, in and of myself, I am not strong enough to do those things. Neither are you, because self is too strong in us. And when somebody comes against us, there's too much of self in us that is just going to react in a way that the world says you should react, right? So what we have to understand is these teachings are not just for anybody. These teachings are not for people that don't believe in Christ, because they won't be able to do it anyway. These teachings are for the people that know and want to follow Jesus. Other than that, it really doesn't apply to anybody else, because they won't be able to do it. You got to have the Lord's help to do these things. It takes a lot of power. It takes way more power to do this than it does to respond the way the world does. You understand? Okay? So now he says, to verse 30, he says, give to every man that asks of thee, and of him that taketh away thy goods, ask them not again. And as you would that men should do to you, do ye also to them likewise. Now, what does he say? As you would want somebody to do to you, that's what you should do for them. Now, if you want to be treated in a certain way, you should treat others that way first. You don't say, well, if they treat me this way, then I'll go ahead and respond that way. Okay, that's not what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying, he says, okay, think about how you would want to be treated, and you need to treat people that way. Does that make sense? Okay, you need to be the one to lead out in that area. Now, that's not what the world tells you. The world says, however somebody treats you, that's how you treat them back.
You have to earn my respect.
Right, exactly. Okay?
He gives you a little bit of common sense, too. There's these people in this world that will use you up. And God gives you opportunities to takes good care of you.
Well, you just said a really good statement there. He says there's people that will use you. Now, is it a loving thing to allow somebody to use you? No. That's not doing them any good. And Jesus didn't let people use him, by the way. Just to let you know, he didn't let people use him. When people tried to use him, he would get away from the situation. He would remove himself from it. That's what we need to do, all right? Because it's a very unloving one of the most unloving things you can do is keep giving somebody their own way when it's actually hurting them.
Enabling them.
It's enabling them. It's hurting them. So in order to actually be like Christ, you don't give them their own way. You do not keep giving in to what they want. You take a stand. Does that make sense? Okay? All right, and he says in verse 32, he says, if you love them which love you only, basically, what thanks have you, or what gratitude have you? For sinners also love those that love them. He's saying, hey, you're not doing anything different than the world. If you just love people that love you, that's what the world does. If people love you in the world, you love them back. But what about the ones that don't? You still need to treat them with love. That's what Jesus is saying. And he says, and if you do good to those that do good to you, what thanks have you? For sinners also do the same. And if you lend to those whom you hope to receive, what thanks have you? For sinners also lend to sinners and receive as much again. He says, hey, if you're letting somebody borrow and expecting them to give it back, that's what the world does. But if you let them have something and you don't expect it back, you're not expecting it, that's acting like Christ. Okay, does that make sense? Okay.
I've had a problem in my life always denying other people to do something for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to do things for people, and then you don't realize that people they receive that, and then they expect more from you. And then next thing you know, they're hating you because you're not giving them what they gave them before.
Right.
So you gotta put all your cares upon the Lord, trust in Him for all things. Use the balance about it, because, and I let people do things for me now. Most of my life, I never let them do anything for me, and I realized it was selfish not letting them do something for me, because I don't need help.
You know, you have to learn.
Got what I need.
Yeah, you have to learn to receive.
Yeah.
That's an important lesson. You have to learn to let people help you sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes we all need to do that. You have to humble yourself and allow somebody
sometimes you got to let people know you need help.
That's true. That's true. Okay, and then he says, look at verse 35. He says, but love your enemies and do good and lend, hoping for nothing again, and your reward shall be great, and you shall be children of the highest, for he is kind to the unthankful and to the evil. Therefore be merciful as your Father in heaven is merciful. Do you see how God is? The Bible tells us here that God himself is kind to the people that are unthankful and to people that are evil. Okay? Now, what does that mean? That means right now, every day, there's people that get up and they shake their fist at God and they curse him, and yet he still shines the sun on them every day. He gives them rain. He gives them food. He gives them breath. Every breath we have is a gift from God. He could literally snatch the breath right out of us if he chose to, but he allows people that curse him to keep breathing. Do you understand? That's a merciful God. People don't understand how merciful God really is to them, and yet they shake their fists at him, they spit on the things of Christ and on the church, and yet God all the while is being very patient with them and merciful with them. Why? Because he knows that there's going to come a day when all of us are going to die. And if we don't have the blood of Jesus covering us and we don't have the Lord in our life, we're not going to be in heaven with him. And God knows that. And so he's being patient because he doesn't want anybody to perish. He wants all people to come to him. But he's not going to force them to do it. He just continues to give them kindness and mercy every single day, even when they don't deserve it, even when they don't treat him the way he's treating them. Do you see how God is actually following the same pattern that he's telling us to follow? He does that every single day to all people, okay? So now, verse 37, let's get into that. One of the most quoted verses that people love to quote, but they don't even understand. Verse 37, judge not, and you shall not be judged. How many, have you ever heard that? There's people, and I've heard this before, it said that there's people that don't even know the Bible, but they know that. They know that verse. They know how to quote that verse. Oh, judge not. Don't judge me lest you be judged, right? But they don't understand even what it means. Now, it says, judge not, and you shall not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Now, a couple of things here. When it says, judge not, lest you be judged, or condemn not, and you will not be condemned, what it's talking about here is you, in and of yourself, passing sentence on somebody. For example, you know somebody's doing bad. You know they're living wrong. You know they're not doing what, and you just say there's no hope for that person. They're done. There is absolutely no hope for them. That is judging that person. That's writing them off as a hopeless cause. They're not a hopeless cause. You're not God. You don't know that. You have no idea where they are and what is going to happen in their life. So you have no right or grounds to be doing that. God is the only one that knows the end from the beginning, not you. So for you to say that person's hopeless, there's no hope for that person. You don't know that. And you're not supposed to do that.
Aren't you about as guilty as they are when you're getting pleasure by seeing they're guilty, and so you feel good because, oh, look at what they're doing.
Well, some people don't feel good about what they're doing. Some people, it's grieving to watch. I mean, for us, we don't like watching people destroy themselves. But at the same time, we shouldn't say ever, there's no hope for that. It's over. There's no hope for them. That's wrong, because every day that they get up, the Bible says God's mercy is new every morning. So every morning, every day, no matter what that person has done their whole entire life, when they wake up the next day, it's a brand new day. It's a brand new start. They have a chance to say, you know what?
Fresh breath.
You know, there's people that have come into churches. I could tell you stories, but there's people that have been living rotten, wicked, evil lives. They've come into churches and they've had this epiphany. One lady, I heard about one lady, she was in a bar, okay? She was a stripper. She was in a bar and she was sitting there and all of a sudden she's like, I am a horrible person. And if I died right now, I would go to hell. She went to a church, she got saved, and now she's a missionary. Like, so you can't write people off. You don't know what God can do in their life and in their situation. And so we shouldn't condemn people as hopeless. Now, a lot of people, it looks like we're all intents and purposes, they would never come to the Lord, but you don't know. A lot of people probably said that about the Apostle Paul.
Right.
Yeah. You know, when he was doing what he was doing, dragging Christians into jail and killing some of them and putting them to death. And then all of a sudden, Jesus appears to him personally, and it changes his whole entire life. And the greatest enemy of the church became the greatest ally. So you just don't know. So let's look at verse 38. Give, and it will be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, shall men give into your bosom. For with the same measure that you mete, or give out, withal it shall be measured to you again. Okay? So, what do we want? Do we want people to forgive us? We have to forgive. Yeah, and let me tell you something, guys. I'm not saying that's easy to do. I'm talking to people, I'm sure, and I know I have things in my life where people have done very bad things to me. Okay? And I've had to forgive them. And if I don't forgive them, I can't be forgiven. Do you realize that? If we don't let things go, we literally will not be forgiven ourselves. Jesus said that. If you don't forgive your Father in heaven, he won't forgive you. You can hinder God's work in your life just by simply having a bitter heart that's filled with unforgiveness. Unforgiveness is a tormentor. It will literally, and I want to tell you something, it's a spirit, and it will torment you. Have you ever been tormented by that? It's in your mind, you're just raging against somebody, thinking about what they did. That's not from God. That's from the devil, and it's meant to destroy your life. He wants you to hold on to that unforgiveness because Satan knows it will ruin you. It will absolutely destroy your life.
Hatefulness is like acid. It's only going to hurt the vessel that has it in it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, somebody said this about unforgiveness, and I like this quote. They said, it's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. That's what you're doing when you hold on to unforgiveness. It's like you drinking a big old thing of poison, but you're wanting them to drop dead or expecting them to drop dead. They're not going to drop dead. You are, because you're holding on to unforgiveness in your life. And so what you want, you have to give that out. If you want people to forgive you, you must forgive them. If you want people to treat you kindly, why don't you try being kind first? If you want people to be merciful to you and give you a pass, because, hey, I made a mistake, right? Give me a break. I'm only human, right? Well, you got to do that too. You can't hold somebody else to a higher standard than you hold yourself to. As you want to be treated, you treat others that way. And see, this is what Jesus is trying to teach his disciples. Now, what we have to understand, guys, is the Christian life is not over when you pray a prayer and accept Jesus in your heart and now I'm going to heaven. There's a huge difference between doing that and what God really wants. That's only the beginning. That is not the end. Getting somebody saved or helping them come to Christ, that's only the beginning. The work that has to be done is now when you have Jesus in you, then he begins to start to work on your character and to change you to be more like him, like what we're reading right now. Again, these things are not easy things to do. They are very difficult things to do. They are very difficult principles to live by. I would say they're impossible to live by unless you have Jesus helping you. You have to have his help. And so, but this is the thing. With his help, you can do it. With his help, you can do these things.
If we believe he will help.
Do you believe him that he can do that for you? Do you
All
believe that
things.
yeah.
All things.
There you go.
All things. He'll
Yeah.
never leave you or forsake you.
Mhm.
He
So-
gave his life for us to have more abundant life.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But
So
we don't earn it.
there's two things that we need to understand about. The first thing is when we come to Jesus, that means we get forgiven. He comes in and to live inside of us through his Spirit. Okay. That's called justification or salvation, right? Then there's another process, and it's called the process of sanctification. And that is where God continually, every day, as you walk with him, he makes you more like him. And he changes you. It's like knocking off all the rough edges on things. Like you got something you got a piece of wood, right? And it's got lots of splintery stuff. But then you go to work on that thing and you start sanding it down. And that's what God does to us. He smooths us out, makes us more like him. He's trying to form us and mold us and shape us every single day to become more like him. Now, what does it mean when he tells you to do these things? Guess what's going to happen? You're going to be in situations where you have to act that way. If you want to follow the Lord and you say, yeah, I really want to follow you, Lord, I want to know you. Guess what's going to happen? People are going to do things to you. And then you're going to have a test. And that test is, how am I going to respond? I said I wanted to follow the Lord. And then now this situation comes up. Am I going to listen to him? Am I going to obey him and do what he would do? Or am I going to do what the world tells me I should be doing? There's your choices right there. Right?
There's a problem, though, I see, because I can find in anybody that they're not perfect.
Yeah.
So if we claim that we're perfect because we made ourselves like Jesus, then they're going to look at us and call us hypocrites.
No. Well, what I said is I don't say we make ourselves like Jesus. Did you hear what I said, though? I said he forms, he begins to, he forms that in us. He does the work.
It does not yet appear what we should be. It's not going to appear what we,
Right. Well, he begins to do the work in us. In other words, to change our character, because he doesn't just want to give us salvation and a ticket to heaven. He wants us to be his witness.
He walks with me and talks with me all the days of my life because it's a joy.
And
reason for being happy.
And he wants us to live.
Never leave us.
If you remember what he said when he left, he says, I'm going to give you my Spirit, and he's going to come with power so that you can be what? My witnesses. The power of a life that's lived this way, it's people, when they see people responding this way and not the way of the world, they go, there's something different about that person. That person is not, they're different. They don't act the way the world does. They don't treat me like everybody else does. There's something different. You know what that difference is? Jesus. The difference is Christ. The difference is Christ being in somebody. It will cause them to be different. That's what we want. We want that, and that is a good witness. A horrible witness or a hypocritical witness is, yeah, I'm a Christian, and then you're cursing, you're doing all these things that are exactly the opposite of what Jesus would do. You're being a hypocrite. You see, that's not a good witness. That's being a very poor witness. And we have a lot of that in the church today, and I'm sorry to say that has to change, but we have a lot of that in the church today. We have a lot of poor witnesses that people say that they're Christian, but the minute they get outside the church walls, they act anything but Christ-like. A real Christian is going to be not just one day a week, not just on Sunday when they're in church. They're going to act the same way all the time. There's going to be a consistency in their character. That's what you have to have. That's the test. That's the test. Is this person, are they the same all the time? Or are they the same when they're around this group of people or that group of people? Or are they different when they're around one group of people and different when they're around the church crowd? There's your test, okay? Now, Jesus says in verse 39, he says, he spoke a parable to them. He says, can the blind lead the blind? Shall they not both fall into a ditch? You don't want to follow a blind person, okay? Because that blind person is going to eventually fall into a ditch. And guess what? If you're blind and you're following a blind person, you're going to fall in it with them, okay? So we don't want to follow people that don't know what they're talking about. This is another huge problem in the church is we've got a lot of blind leaders. We've got people that think they know what it means to be a leader or a Christian, and they're saying, yeah, I'm this, follow me. and they have a horrible example. They have a horrible witness. That's not what you want to do, because if you follow that person, you're going to fall into a ditch just like they're going to fall into a ditch, because we're walking right behind them. Okay? Look what he says. Verse 40, a disciple is not above his master. Everyone that is perfect, or that means mature. It doesn't mean you're without sin or you don't do anything wrong. It means mature, shall be as his master. And why do you behold the mote, or the little twig or straw that is in your brother's eye, but perceivest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Either how can you say to your brother, brother, let me pull out the mote or little speck that is in thine eye, but when thou thyself beholdest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Thou hypocrite, first cast the beam out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to pull out the mote that is in your brother's eye. You see what he's saying here? You know what we do? We look at imperfections in other people. Isn't it true? Think about this for a minute. It's always easier to see bad in others than it is yourself. You ever thought about that? Somebody else is doing something, you can pick it out right away, right? But you, a lot of times, are doing things the same way, and you don't see it in yourself. Jesus is saying, don't look at the specks in other people's eyes, and you have this big old tree that's blocking your vision. You can't even see straight because you got so much junk in your way, and you're trying to help somebody else. You can't help anybody else if you got junk in your own face that's blinding you, right? Okay? He says, first, get rid of that big old log that's blinding you. And then, if you do that, then you're going to be able to help other people. We dare not try to help other people when we ourselves have a bunch of junk in our own life that is not right with God. We don't want to be trying to help people come to God when we ourselves have many, many things that are hindering us in our own life. Do you understand? That's what Jesus is saying. He's not saying don't try to help people. He's saying don't try to help people in a hypocritical way. Now, back to the judging thing, okay? We have to make judgments about people's behavior and character sometimes, but we don't have to condemn them. In other words, we don't have to say, that person, there's no hope for them. But what we can say is, that person is doing some things that I need to stay away from. I don't need to be around it because it's just going to bring me down. Now, that's not a bad judgment. That's judging the fruit of what you see, not the person. Does that make sense? You're looking at their actions. You have to look at people's actions because the actions or the fruit of their life is going to show you what kind of a person they are. You have to do that. When you go to the market to pick out fruit or vegetables or meat, you don't go to the counter and go, oh man, that steak is nice and green. I think I'm going to grab that. No, you don't want that. You want the steak that's nice and fresh and bright red, right? It's just been cut. Same with the produce. You don't want to go and get a bunch of lettuce that's all brown and wilted, right? You don't buy that. You make a judgment like that is not a good piece of lettuce. I don't want to buy that because it looks horrible, right? So we make judgments about things every day, and we have to, right? What to wear, what's appropriate, those kinds of things. We do all those kind of things, and those are making judgments. There's a difference between that kind of judgment and condemning people. Because you don't know what people have been through. You don't know what's going on in their lives. Or maybe you do know what's going on in their lives, but you don't know what's going on in their heart because you can't see in their heart. Only God can. And so you can't condemn them and say there's no hope for you when all the while God is waiting for them. He says, yes, there is hope for that person. Every day is a new day. Make sense? Okay?
But God has the advantage when He creates us. He already knows what our path is going to be and
He
what
does.
we're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
We
Yep.
don't have that advantage. We
That's
can't
right.
read their minds and hearts.
That's right. That's right.
We can enter in by faith, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's, he's born from above. We were born from below.
Yeah.
And so we're born
Okay.
dead in trespasses and sin
Mhm.
until
Mm-hmm.
we enter into a relationship by
Okay.
faith with Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
He lives in us. We're
Yep.
born again.
Mm-hmm.
Then He'll never leave us or forsake us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to get through this chapter. So let's look at verse 43, okay? I'm going to read verse 43 to 45. For a good tree brings brings not forth corrupt fruit, neither does a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Every tree is known by his own fruit. For of thorns men do not get figs, nor of a bramble bush gather they grapes. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is good, and an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is evil. For out of the abundance of his heart his mouth speaketh. Okay? Jesus is teaching us about people, characters of people. A good tree, okay, Jesus says, is going to bring forth good fruit. It's not going to bring forth bad fruit. Okay? A bad tree is not going to bring forth good fruit. It's common sense, but we have to think about this because this is the thing. A lot of times we want to believe or give people the benefit of the doubt when all the while we see bad fruit in their life.
There's two trees.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
tree of the knowledge of good
Yeah.
and evil.
Hold on a sec. Let me finish. Wait. Just a sec. So you have to look at it, and Jesus is using an analogy. You don't get, when you see a thorn bush, you don't get figs out of that. When you see an apple tree, you're not going to have pears growing on the apple tree. Whatever that tree is, that's the fruit that's going to come out of it. And that's what Jesus is saying. He's saying a good man out of a good heart is going to bring forth good fruit. Now, I believe when he says a good man, he's not talking about, none of us are good in and of ourselves. He's talking about those that have been saved by the Lord Jesus, and they bring forth his fruit in their life because they're part of his tree. Okay? But an evil person out of an evil heart is going to bring forth bad fruit. Okay? That's a good test for people. You got to look at the fruit of their life, their works, not their words. He doesn't say look at their words, because people can say all the right things. They can say anything you want to hear to manipulate you and tell you what you want to hear. All the while, there's a bunch of bad fruit coming out of their life. So you can't listen to the words. You have to make sure the words and the actions are the same. Do you understand? No hypocrisy. If somebody says one thing and does another, that's bad fruit. That's bad fruit. And you don't want to say, oh yeah, that person, they're exactly what they say they are, when all the while you can see that they're not. They're bringing forth bad fruit. And then the mouth. He says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So what we need to do, a lot of times we want to talk. What we really need to do is listen to what people say, because they will tell us, by listening, they're going to tell us who and what they are by the words that come out of their mouth. Okay? The words and the actions, if they don't match, you know there's problems, right? So, that makes sense? Okay? All right, let's finish this chapter. Verse 46. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not the things which I say? Okay? So, we've got a lot of people that call Jesus Lord. Oh, Lord, I love you. But they're not doing what he tells them to do. Okay? And he's asking, why do you do that? Why are you saying I'm Lord, but you don't listen to me? You don't do what I'm telling you to do. Now look what he says. Whosoever comes to me and hears my sayings and doeth them, I will show you who he is like. He is like a man which built his house and digged deep and laid the foundation on a rock. And when the flood rose and the stream beat vehemently upon that house, it could not shake it, for it was founded upon the rock. Okay? If you hear me, this is what Jesus says. If you hear me and you do what I'm telling you to do, you're like a person that is building a house on a rock, a solid foundation. If anybody knows about building houses, you know if the foundation is bad, it doesn't matter how good the house is, how pretty it is, how high up it is, how lofty it is. If it has a bad foundation, that house is going to come down at some point. Jesus says, if you hear what I say and you listen to me and you do it, you're like a wise person that build their house on a rock. And when the storm comes and the flood comes and the winds come and it pound on that house is going nowhere because it's solid. It's founded on me and my teachings. And look what he says. But he that heareth and doeth not is like a man that without a foundation built his house upon the earth. and against which the stream did beat vehemently, and immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great. Okay? So here's the problem we have in the church. We have a lot of people that hear Jesus' words, but they don't do them. Okay? They hear what he says, like what we read tonight about how to treat your enemies and everything. They hear all that, but they still keep doing the opposite. And what does Jesus say? If you do that, you're like somebody that's foolish, that's building their house on earth or sand, and when the floods come and everything hits your house, it's going to fall, and great will be the fall of it. Like, it's going to smash that thing, right? That's your life. The house built on obedience is your life built on Christ. The house built on disobedience is your life built on not listening to Christ. You know what he wants you to do, but you won't listen. And this is the challenge for us as believers, is we need to listen to Jesus, and then we also need to do what he tells us to do, because it's for our own good. You think Jesus is just telling us things just because he wants to sound great? He's telling us things because he wants us to have a good life. He wants us to have a very good, fulfilling, abundant life. And we're not going to have that if we don't do what he says. If we listen in church and Bible study and things like this, but we don't take it to heart and do it, we're going to fail miserably. Just because you come to a Bible study or come to a church, that doesn't make you right with God. It may make you feel good on the inside, but that doesn't mean you're his, doesn't mean you're following him. What the test is if you're doing what he tells you to do. If you're believing him, and that takes trust. We have to learn to trust the Lord, that the Lord knows what's best for us. Do we believe that? Do you believe you know what's best for you, or do you believe God knows what's best for you? And if God knows what's best for you, and you don't know what's best for you, maybe you ought to try listening to him a little bit, giving him a chance. A lot of people never give him a real chance. Going to church on Sunday is not giving God a chance. Just because you go to church, giving God a chance is going to church on Sunday, listening, and then practicing what you hear and learn in your everyday life. That's giving God a chance. And you will see, if you will do that, your life will never be the same. It will be different. It will be. It will. And it's not. I'm not guessing about that. It's not a guess. It's like, I know that from personal experience, but also it's been in the lives of countless generations before us that have done just that. And we have Jesus' promise too. So anyway, it's just good to think about where, as we go from here and we close, think about where you're at in your life. Where are you at? Is there any area where God's pointing out to you, hey, what about this right here? You got to listen. You got to give him a chance to help you in those areas that, and it doesn't hurt to say, God wants us to be honest with him, like, hey, Lord, this is really a hard thing for me. I'm really having a hard time with this. I am struggling. I am hurting. I'm at the end of my rope here. You got to do something because I need your help. He's wanting you to let go and trust him so that he can do what he needs to do in your life. But until you let go, if you want to keep holding on, you can do it. He's going to let you do that. But guess what is going to happen? You're just going to keep struggling. It's like running on a hamster wheel. You're just going to keep running. You're never going to get anywhere. You got to trust the Lord and let him help you. You got to give him a chance. And if you will do that, he will move on your behalf, but you got to give him a chance. Okay? Any questions? Any questions?
Where does it say there's no other foundation that can be laid? Where does it say that?
I believe it's Corinthians.
It's
Yeah.
important to know that.
You bet. Yep.
It's important to know that.
Yep. That's right. I agree.
Be built upon